welcome to our virtual meeting. Today we're talking all about music publishing. So please welcome lawyer Sofie Sigvardt. I'm going to tell you wrong.
Sigvardt, but yeah, it's a complicated one.
Take it over, Sofie.
Well, hi everyone. Thanks for joining this virtual meeting, and thanks to Amplify her and Andrea for having me. As you said, my name is Sofie, and I'm a music lawyer at a firm called Harbottle and Lewis. And today I'll be talking to you about your music rights. We'll start off by looking at publishing, maybe taking a little bit more of an in-depth approach to what a music publishing deal looks like, and then time allowing, just discussing what the options are that are available and distributing recordings, because those are two quite separate things. So the publishing rights and music recording rights are two different copyrights, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. My aim with this meeting is to just give you the tools to really navigate the basics of a publishing agreement. And as I mentioned, quickly touching on kind of distribution agreements and different ways of getting your recordings out there. But it really is more of a general overview. And I hope it gives you some useful things to think about. But I really would still encourage you that if you did get a deal from a publisher, distributor, or record label, to seek advice from a lawyer, as it really is a music lawyer's job to ensure that you're fully across what it says on the page before you sign. And these deals can be quite long, so really making sure that you know what it says on page 18 is an important task for a music lawyer to ensure that you're across. Should probably give you a little bit more background on me, and let me see if this works. Yep, there we go. Quite a big picture of me. The firm that I work at, as I mentioned, is called Harbottle and Lewis. We're a media entertainment firm based in Covent Garden. On a day-to-day, I work for a wide range of artists and songwriters. Work for big pop idols like Dua Lipa, Stormzy, and work with newer singer-songwriters. There's an artist called Hamish that I'm quite excited about, who's about to release we're to come on the market. We work for a girl band called Sistra, and we've worked with them from the very beginning, from when they were just starting out to kind of securing their first deals. And I started my journey in music in the legal team at a company called Domino Records. You may have come across that from like Arctic Monkeys and Franz Ferdinand. And I've now been at Harbottle for 4 years. Then going into what a music publishing deal really is, we should probably kind of take a step back and think, okay, who are the music publishers? We've got a concept of what we call like the major music publishers, and that's the like of Warner Chappell, Sony Music Publishing, Universal Music Publishing, and then you've got kind of more like mini majors, which are like Cobalt and Concord, and a host of indie outfits. Like Domino has a publishing entity where I used to work before. Beggars have publishing entities. You might come across like Bucks or Wise. And as I mentioned, a publishing deal would only cover your musical compositions. So those are the actual lyrics and the melody, kind of like to think of it more as like the written kind of music. And then a sound recording, you can obviously have multiple artists performing on a recording, having their own version of that composition. And the copyrights in each of those recordings is entirely separate from a publishing deal. A publisher, their kind of main responsibilities would be to collect income from your compositions, making sure that you're registered with PRS for your share of the different compositions, so that you can collect that really important writer share of public performance income. That will be payable every time that your composition is played in public, and PRS collects that income to you and pays you what we call the writer share. And if you're signed to a publishing deal, the publisher share would go to your publisher, but we'll go into that in a bit more detail shortly. A publisher would also be trying to secure opportunities for you, making sure that your compositions are being used, whether that's in the form of securing third-party sync licenses for you, so getting your composition into a film or a TV show, or if you're not an artist yourself, placing your compositions with another artist who will do a cover of it, finding the right fit for that, or putting you in songwriting sessions. So finding someone that you could really vibe with and maybe co-write their album, or they could help you on your album, depending on whether you're an actual singer-songwriter or more of a songwriter yourself. And in terms of what rights do they acquire, so in a fictional situation, you've been in our situation here, you've been assigned a publishing deal, and typically what the publisher would look to acquire would be the copyright. So there's all important copyrights in the musical compositions. And it used to be the norm that they would get an assignment of those rights in perpetuity, or at least for the extent of copyright, which in the UK is 70 years after the death of the author. But today we're finding more that there would be a limit on this, or at least a time where in the future you would get your rights back. Or it could even be an exclusive license, which we won't go into the kind of maybe boring details of what an assignment versus an exclusive license is, but it's just basically the main concept is making sure that your recordings do come back, or your compositions do come back at a certain point. It can take the form of either a single song assignment where it would cover a specific composition. For example, if you've written a work that's just blowing up on TikTok, or really getting high streams, or it could be a specific set of compositions, an album that you've co-written, or it can take the form of a more kind of traditional publishing arrangement where you would enter into an exclusive agreement with a publisher, and it would cover the compositions that you write for a specific term. And the way that that normally works is that it could be an initial period of, say, 3 years, and then that might extend until what we call recoupment if you've taken an advance. So that's quite important to consider. So when I'm saying recoupment, I'm referring to, let's say you get paid 100K of an advance. It means that you have to earn royalties from those compositions enough to bring in £100,000, and then after £100,000, you'll start to then be in the green, and you'll get royalties in from those compositions. And if you didn't meet that advance, then in the scenario that we just talked about, if the initial period extends until recoupment, you could be stuck into that deal for a long time, or at least or indefinitely. And it would mean that all the songs that you're writing in that time while the term is ongoing will be captured by the publisher under that initial deal. And so you can kind of see how it's important to maybe try and cap that, try and limit any of these kind of recoupment provisions. And that's very much what we as music lawyers do, and is a point that we're negotiating with publishers all the time. The publisher might also have an option, just to make it a little bit more complicated, to extend that term. So we've said an initial period of 3 years. Let's say, things don't go to plan, and the publisher decides, well, we're not gonna work with you anymore. Then the deal ends after those 3 years. However, they would also have the option to extend for another 3-year period, which is important to note that that's exercisable at the publisher's discretion. So they can, if you agree to an option, they can just give you notice after the 3 years to say, yeah, we'd love to work with you another 3 years. And you don't really have a say, but what you get in exchange is often an advance. And that money, people often use that to put towards the next album that they're creating, or the next kind of projects that they're working on. So that's kind of the trade-off, and why you would agree an option. And there could be, multiple options, or just the one. That really is a point of negotiation again. And then, yeah, like I mentioned, that kind of means that whole time period is when all the compositions that you're writing will be captured under that deal. And then that's slightly different from what we call a rights period or retention period. So we have the concept of a term, which covers, the period in which you're writing for and the publisher gets to benefit from all those songs. And then after that term has ended, the publisher will continue to be able to exploit those compositions for another set period of time. And that, can be anything from 10 years, 12, 18, even 20 years. And is really a point to consider when you're signing up to a publishing deal, whether or not you feel that the rights period or the retention period that you're giving them matches what you're getting in return, the advances, the like the A&R kind of services that you're getting from them, is this a publisher that you really feel matches your catalog and can give you the very best in exchange for the rights period that they require. Other than that, so that's kind of given you an idea of like who the publisher is, what they do, what sort of rights they're dealing with, and for how long. Other terms, that you'd come across are advances. So we mentioned those are prepayments for your royalties. And that really will depend on where you're at in your stage when you get these publishing deals. Some artists might choose to hold back, if you're a releasing artist yourself, to hold back, build a bit more of a following before you enter into a publishing agreement. Others, if you're a songwriter, it really depends on the kind of catalog that you have to show, and what the level of the advance is. What could be another advance could be your legal costs, for example. So we would often ask publishers when we're acting for a writer, that instead of the writer paying out of their pocket, we would get the publisher to make a legal fees contribution, which is basically a recoupable sum in advance, so that you're paying for the legal costs, but you don't have to have the money straight away, and you're just recouping it against your future royalties. But that's a point to look out for. So even though they say we'll cover your legal costs, it is still going to be recoupable, and you are paying for that yourself. And a lot of those payments are kind of recoupable sums. So is there a question? The other thing is royalties, so they're also quite important. We've got what we call kind of the headline rate or the mechanical rate, and that applies to basically everything that's not listed. So we're going to talk about public performance income and syncs, and mechanical royalties. Mechanical royalties used to be payable every time, if you think in the old world, you'd press a CD, so the mechanical press of a CD or vinyl. In today's world, the world has decided that a stream is both a public performance, so public performance royalties will be paid to PRS, and a share of the income will also then be mechanical royalties and paid to the publisher. And so you would get whatever rate you agree for the mechanical, that would be your kind of the share of the mechanical share of a stream, if that makes sense. And it's quite a convoluted way that the world has decided to do that. Another kind of share that you'd get, so you mentioned public performance income, you're always entitled to the writer share of public performance. So when you register your song with PRS, you can collect that income from PRS directly. The other share, a publisher, so the other 50% of that income, a publisher will be able to claim, but under the publishing agreement, they will give you a share of their share. So if we've said you're getting 50% of the income, let's say of £100, you're getting £50, the publisher is getting £50, but they've agreed to pay you 50% of their £50. So you end up with overall £75 of the public performance income, essentially. And that's quite an important royalty to also get. And how that ranges could be anything from 40, 50, 60% of the publisher's share of public performance income, but you would always retain at least a 50% of the public performance income, if that makes sense. I've said 50% a lot, and if you have any questions, we can definitely discuss that again. And then another one is sync rates. So sync is obviously quite important in today's world. It's a way of getting a lump sum payment, getting your music out there as well, so you'll have a specific rate agreed for this, say like 70%, or you could also, if you are an artist or you have a following already and you think that you will be bringing in, quite a lot of syncs yourself, you can have a concept of publisher procured syncs, where they have gone out and directly procured that sync opportunity. Then they might pay you a slightly lower rate. Whereas if you've gone out and you've done the whole hard work of getting the sync, then you could claim to have a higher, that you should get a higher rate of income from that. But again, that's all something to agree at the kind of deal at the point of signing the publishing agreement. But something to keep in mind if you are something that's already getting quite a lot of syncs in, that maybe that's something that you should be putting in your publishing agreement or discussing with your publisher. Final point kind of in relation to publishing deals is approvals, because you are basically granting a publisher the exclusive rights to exploit your compositions. And so you have to think, what would I want approval over if a publisher who, you know, I'm sure is someone that you do trust, but you kind of want to make sure that you're involved in how those compositions are exploited. So that can be like any third-party licenses, any syncs that are granted. You know, it could be a great sync opportunity, but maybe you don't agree with the product, so you want to be able to reject it. Any sort of like covers, any artists that are going to be singing your music, to the extent that you have control over that. And also in today's world, you know, briefly, I don't know, might have been before people joined, but Andrea and I were talking about, you know, AI, and how the impact, well, that will have an impact on kind of how compositions are used. Is the publisher going to allow your music to be used for machine learning? Having approval over that, or maybe at least something that, you know, you might want to talk to your publisher about their approach to in today's world. So kind of considering all these approvals over, like, what would you want to have control over, that your publisher should be coming to you with, and making sure that you're across everything. That's kind of, yeah, music publishing deal, very briefly discussed. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to go through them. Might make sense more at the end.
Okay.
And let's know if you've got questions. I'm happy to answer them.
About the syncs.
Yes.
You explain that a little bit more clearly. So are you basically talking though about original composers' music?
So it's different. So a composer agreement would be different. So normally, if you're commissioned to write the music for a specific film, and normally with that you would assign, you know, you might assign the rights to the producer in exchange for royalties, and it's almost a little mini publishing deal that you're doing for those specific compositions.
Okay. Yeah.
Whereas a sync is more like existing music that's already been released, and it's a non-exclusive license to the producer to use your music in a specific scene. For a TV show, you would limit it to an episode, for example, and it would just be that, you know, one use, non-exclusive use in exchange for a fee.
Okay.
Sorry, I realize sometimes it's good to ask those questions to make sure I'm explaining everything.
Yeah, okay, I get it. So that's so if I want to give my rendition of my music to a filmmaker or a studio, then, you know, it's all linked together, but it's sort of a one-off deal. It's not anything sort of ongoing. Yeah,
and commission, so composer deals, that's more like where they commission you to create original music for that specific production. So
yeah,
say,
yeah.
Oh,
but say they want to use my voice, is that classed as a sync as well?
Depends. So
I mean, my song that I've recorded.
Yeah, if it's a song that you've recorded, then that would be a sync. Yeah, okay. And to the extent that you could, definitely, like, much better for you for that to be a non-exclusive license, so that they could use it in, you know, that one specific film, but you can then go on and use it however you want to use it elsewhere.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Can I also say, yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask or raise your hand, or you can also ask in the chat, and Sofie will respond as she goes along. But go ahead, Jody, take the next question.
So you mentioned that a publishing deal is essentially signing away the copyrights, and I'm just wondering, I'm an independent artist at the moment, should I be keeping track of copyright? Like, I don't even know how to make a copyright for my own music.
So copyright kind of exists as soon as you create something.
Okay.
So as long as it's an original work that you haven't copied from someone else. So any song that you're creating on your own volition, that will have copyright attached to it. Obviously, if it came down to someone claiming that, oh my God, you've copied, or, you know, you copied my works, as it happened to Ed Sheeran, it's a good idea to have a record of when you created that song. So a demo recording, you know, any sort of evidence to show that you created it around that time. But copyright in it subsists when you're creating it.
Yeah. And do you know, like, if you post like your demo online, like just on social media, could that be classed as proving that you did it first?
I mean, obviously, we won't really be able to say what the courts will say, and you know, if there was an issue. But you know, that's, you know, certainly showing that you had created it at that time.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. Thank you for answering that,
And
Sophie.
no worries. And for the purpose of a publishing agreement, you know, normally you tell them, you know, you've gone into a songwriting session and you've agreed, and the publishers will rely on you telling them, oh, I've got 25%, we've agreed that. Or, you know, it getting agreed between your management, or if you need the publisher to step in and make, you know, figuring out what's fair depending on your contribution to the song. You know, they kind of help with that sort of stuff as well. But it is important that once you come out of a session, or even before you enter it, to just say, hey, everyone in the room, how are we going to do this? Because as I said, copyright does kind of just subsists once the original work is created. And so how do you deal with that if you've all contributed to it? And I appreciate that's hard to know before you've even gone into the session, because you don't know if someone has a great idea, someone vibes on that, and you know what the result of the product is going to be. And that's just such a difficult thing. But having maybe a framework of figuring out, okay, well, we'll start off with if it's two of you, 50-50, but then if someone really, you know, massively contributes to one part, you might say, oh, well, you know, it's fair is fair, and you might have 60% of it.
Yeah, that's brilliant to try and like think, because I'm trying to keep track of like any collaborations I'm doing.
Yeah, and in today's world, you know, maybe just send them an email, a follow-up email saying, hi, great, thanks, so happy we were able to agree 50-50.
Yeah, that's good job.
Yeah,
Brill, thank you.
No, it's write it on a napkin. I don't know, but napkins might lose, so.
Yeah.
Cool. I don't know if there's any no questions in the box. Cool. Well, with that, and if you have any other questions, I'm happy to pick them up at any time. But we can go over to just kind of thought this would just, because I'm sure I've given you quite a lot of information already on the publishing side. So I just wanted to touch kind of briefly about the different ways that I'm certainly seeing are available for distributing recordings at the moment, and kind of, you know, the pros and cons of the different formats. So there's obviously the direct upload to different platforms like Ditto, where you have control over what is uploaded. If there's any sort of exclusivity, it will certainly be limited. And again, just to take a step back, we are talking about sound recordings here. So assuming that you'd be the owner of the sound recording, uploading it, or at least have agreed with your producer who actually owns the copyright. But you have control over what is uploaded. And hopefully it should be a term that you can get out relatively quickly. So when you do sign up to these platforms, I would just encourage you to have a look and just make sure that it is something that, if there's no money behind it, that, you know, you can withdraw your recordings and get them back relatively quickly, so that if you were to get a deal further down the line with a record label, for example, that wants to put money behind it, you are able to gather your catalog and then give those rights onwards if that's what you're interested in. In terms of cons, as I mentioned, there's typically no advance or investment in the music, less support from the distributor, maybe limited A&R support. I know some of them kind of do upload your music, they track how well it's doing, and then if it's starting to get traction, they might put a little bit more of investment into actually plugging it or putting it on playlists. So in that kind of scenario, it really depends like how your music is doing, but a lot of it is on the artist to promote it and make sure that it gets discovered. The other kind of say in-between model between the three that I want to discuss today is kind of a distribution or label services agreement. So we've got the likes of AWOL or ADA, for example, or offering this, and kind of tend to see that the artist will retain more control over what is uploaded. But this is subject to an exclusive holdback period. So the distributor or label services provider might say that, fine, we'll only release, this one album, or you're giving us the rights to this one album, but please don't release other recordings around it. So give us, maybe like 3 months exclusivity period between signing this agreement and for that album that we're releasing to come out. And that's in exchange for them maybe putting a little bit more money behind, so marketing funds, or giving you a fund for recording costs. There might even be a personal advance, and in this scenario, the net receipts, so that's kind of your royalties, will be the money that comes in subject to cost of the top, and then whatever is left is basically being split down the middle. I guess the kind of cons on this is that the artist is still responsible for third-party clearances, so you would need to reach out to any mixers, producers, featured artists, any samples, and any payments for them would either be something that you're still paying for upfront if there's no recording cost contribution, or in any event, their royalties would come out of your 50% share. So you're still, and you might also sometimes have to account to those third parties directly. So that's another point. Well, should also seek legal advice. Having an industry accountant once you're starting to get traction is also very important in this industry. You're still also, organizing recording sessions. You get the vibe. There's quite a lot of responsibility still on the artist in this setup. But you kind of, with that, get control in exchange for some money. And then we've got the more traditional record label, where you get a dedicated A&R, who's providing services to you, who's in the studio with you and making sure that the album or the recordings that you're working on really get shaped to where you want it to be. And they would have experience from, taking artists that are similar to you from unknown to, massive worldwide artists. And they'll help you with kind of any recording, marketing, distribution. And so you can kind of maybe you feel like you're in safe hands with that. I guess the cons of that is that the royalties might be lower. You might have less control over the recording process. And so as you can kind of see here, there's it comes with the money and the investment in between, but it's in exchange for the rights that you also hold, and kind of exchanging that for the income and the support that you can get on the recording side. But there's definitely pros and cons to both. I don't know if anyone has any experience on the call with the different models that they want to share. Any pros and cons that you've come across?
Anybody? No?
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question. Well, could you explain neighboring rights?
Could you explain more about neighboring rights? So neighboring rights is also on the recording side, whereas it's relating to kind of public performance and those income, but on the recording side. So you've got obviously PRS on the publishing side, we've kind of covered that. And then on the sound recording side, you have neighboring rights in your recording, so you can collect that from PPL and other collection societies worldwide. And there are specific companies these days that will kind of compete with PPL and collect that sort of income on your behalf. And I guess it's quite important if you're a featured artist, for example, or a producer, to make sure that you're collecting all of that income correctly. But it is a complicated world, because you can literally have 2p accruing in Malaysia, and then having, what do they collect? The broadcasting of the recording. So when it's publicly performed, and there's different ways of song, like a recording being publicly performed. So could be in the form of just radio. And I think the concept of how you've kind of got a public performance versus I guess making it, yeah, public performance versus like a sync, for example. A sync is like where you've chosen to put it in a film and TV and you're getting income from that, whereas public performance will be even in that film when that film is then showed, there might be royalties being paid for that, literally that recording being played in that film or being played on the radio. And there's, yeah.
Mm.
But it's a complicated area, and neighbouring rights are just there. Registering, it's important to register with the societies, and you've got PPL for that side.
Yeah, it's just like actors, they get, you know, a few pence every time something's showed, and it could be years afterwards they're still getting money each time and it's collected. Yeah.
And I guess I know it's a big thing in the US with sound exchange. So a lot of producers and featured artists are really, really hot on making sure that they're going to be registered correctly on the different recordings. So yeah, in the US you've got sound exchange. Here it's PPL. There are still different, in addition to sound exchange. In the US you've got BMI, ASCAP, and I can't think of the other ones, but there are other societies there. So nothing to do with composition. So, well, I guess when you're broadcasting, so in the context of broadcasting, do you mean like a radio play or a Spotify type broadcast? Radio, yeah. So, well, on a radio, so you're also, it's a public performance of both copyrights. So there's, on the composition, again, neighbouring rights just as a concept is only on the recording side, just that word where you've got public, it's just called public performance rights on the composition side. But for a radio play, you would be getting both types of royalties. So you'd have to be registered both as a songwriter with PRS and as a producer or contributor in some form to the specific recording with PPL. And there are two types of income that you would collect at the same time, because arguably often when a composition is exploited, a sound recording will also be exploited. But I guess it depends if you are the artist, because often songwriters might not be the main artist on the recording, and so you could be paying two different people for one broadcast on radio. There is. Don't know if anyone has any other questions. That was everything for me, because I was conscious of also talking for too long. But you've got my email on the screen there, and I'm really happy to answer any questions that I can. I think it's so important for people to understand the two sides of the copyright and what you're dealing with, as there are so many ways of doing it, particularly in today's world where we've got streaming, people are self-releasing, there's music coming from all over the world. So really understanding the two copyrights that you have as a songwriter and a singer or an artist is really important to help navigate the business, I would say.
I have a question, but
yeah.
Guys, feel free to come up with the questions if you have any. In today's world, how do you find like the publishing deals being made? Like, is it different than how it used to be? Because it's much harder to get nowadays.
I guess it's finding the right home, and I guess that also comes from the fact that more music from around the globe is now available. So I don't know if the same amount of publishing deals are available, but maybe you're competing against a much bigger pool of songwriters, for example. And so I think just a general, point in the music industry is finding that way to get discovered. Whether that's as a songwriter or as an artist, and getting in a room with those publishers probably is what's getting harder. In terms of the deals, hopefully artists are getting more kind of more bargaining power. And as I mentioned earlier, it used to be that copyright was assigned and you wouldn't get it back, whereas now we're seeing more, there is a rights reversion at some point in the future, so that you're not just signing a deal now that, circumstances change. What can happen in 15 years. And so if you've done, do a big song now, that you've given away to a publisher, not given away, that you've, in collaboration with a publisher, has worked on, but that you maybe want to take back or put to another home later on, you can then do that in today's kind of publishing world.
Okay.
I think there's another question. Benefits being self-published. I guess you get to collect 100%. You're not sharing the income with anyone. But as I mentioned, there's so many different royalties in publishing. And I guess the difficulty is that it might be difficult to collect those payments. Let's say, if, for example, your song blows up in Malaysia, how do you collect the income from there if you're a UK-based songwriter? But as I said, there are tools out there. I know there are platforms that allow you to just to sign up to them, and they take very small cuts, and you can leave them quite quickly, but they might not give you those the services that we talked about in the beginning, putting you in a room with other songwriters. But you can totally be self-published. It's just as a lot, as with everything, it's a lot of work for the artist. And I guess what we've got with publishers, with labels, distributors, is people with industry experience who are around to help you and try and elevate your work. But that isn't to say that you can't be self-published or you can't self-release. Co-publishing, do you mean in terms of co-publishing with another writer, or you're publishing someone else's work? With another publisher. So you might have, some publishers have a sub-publisher. So you might sign to a smaller outfit in the UK where you just really like the team, but they don't have the wider network to collect those important payments globally. And so they might appoint a sub-publisher to, work in another territory, or, they do, kind of, I think territories is often where we're seeing people have a sub-publisher or a co-publisher. But that would be normally you would choose that between, that would kind of be a consideration to also discuss with the different publishers, because they would obviously have limitations, I guess, to their rights. So instead of it being a worldwide publishing agreement, you might have someone that's doing the US only, and then someone doing rest of the world, and then they have to make sure that they work together and not, for example, pitch the same films or the same opportunities for you.
Okay, any other question? I have another question. What about indie labels and 50-50 deals? What do you think about those? As in
terms of, as in label deals, like just
like indie labels usually, the usual deal right now is 50-50. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of, I guess you're saying we're going to split everything 50-50. All the costs are going to be recouped off the top. So on one side, what is the smaller indie label putting in? Are they putting any risk into what they're taking, or are they just saying, yeah, we're just both going to stand behind the cost, but then I'm going to get 50-50? Well, I guess you're not standing behind the cost. We're saying I'm going to spend, again, let's say 100,000 on your record. That's going to have my 100K is going to be recouped first from royalties, and then we'll split the rest 50-50. What is the kind of risk in that? But equally, they might be bringing, an amazing team, people that you really trust, and that's kind of the service level that they're added. And I guess it is also, you're then ensured that you're going to get 50-50 from the exploitation, which is a higher rate than what has traditionally been on offer in the music industry.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
It's hard to say what's the best deal, because it really depends, I guess, on where you're at, what your catalog is saying about you, all of those things.
Yeah, I guess also it's because we have a lot of indie artists that are on the call. I guess it's looking at what is, what's the next step after you self-publish a certain amount of songs. Like, how do you then move forward and know, again, what's the best deal, but like know where to give and where to take when you're on that, you've done everything on your own, you're like, you want the next level.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of seeing what you can get there, both in terms of like what do you need in terms of funding to be able to make your next record, and the team is really important. These are people that will be in the studio with you, and then how long are they getting the rights for? It might seem like, oh well, 10 years, not too bad, but actually like a lot can happen in that time. And so thinking about, is the money that they're willing to put down, is the services that they're going to give you, does that equate to kind of how many rights that they're getting, and is that kind of trade-off? That's quite important, I think, to always have a think about when you're getting into the negotiations with this.
Yeah, cool. We have another question. What's the most important thing you need in order to be a good publisher?
I mean, I'd say you just have to really make sure you look after your writers, collect and accurately, distribute to them, distribute for their income, and being able to provide those services that we talked about. So putting them into effective songwriting sessions where they meet people that they do work with well is what I would assume it has the most success kind of rate for a successful relationship. But in terms of running a publishing business, unfortunately, I'm just a lawyer and I tend to act on, I guess, the other side. So I guess maybe it's an industry secret that we'll have to learn.
Maybe. Cool. Is there any other questions? There's no stupid questions, guys, by the way, so just go if you have any questions. No? Okay. Cool. I think it is a lot of information.
Watch it back. I was trying to limit it, but it's just these are the
no, but it's good. I think it's not, it's a lot, but it's, yeah, I understand how you made it. But yeah, we do have forming a publishing arm here. That's why all these questions. Yeah. Yeah, cool. We would love to hear more about the kind of music and artists. Are you looking for musicians? Are you looking for artists, or tell us more? You can also take on the video and speak out loud if you want to. Cool. Thank you, Loti. Happy that it's been helpful. Yeah. No? Is it Ilya? Ilya, I think. Okay. I'll leave it a moment. No, okay.
Sorry, yeah, I'm in the middle of commute. That's why.
Okay.
Yeah, but because like I'm forming our publishing and as we work with PRS, so that's why a lot of this question is like I wanted to cover all basics, all sites before forming up as a publisher, so that I can, like you said, it was great advice when you mentioned that the best thing about being a good publisher is to support your artists as much as possible, and that's grand.
So what kind of publishing are you? Do you have the artist? Are you looking into? Yeah.
Yeah, because because I offer legal services in terms of distribution. So alongside it, I wanted to offer publishing. So mainly for my artists, but also anyone who wants to say publish their music and also say sync it. Those are the things that I'm doing up. But importantly, like just understanding the things like neighbouring rights, understanding who to go to is very important, so that if I can understand it, then I can explain to my songwriters or my future songwriters that these are the services that I offer as a publisher.
Mm.
So I am actually looking for songwriters if anybody wants help.
Well, we have a lot of songwriters.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of composers as well. And it was interesting because if I'm not wrong, like for example, like Mozart and Beethoven, they no longer have copyright on their publishing. That's what I heard from uh when I was speaking to PRS.
Sorry, who doesn't have copyright?
Like
Mozart.
Beethoven and Mozart because it's more than 70 years.
I'm
Did you
sorry.
hear that, Andrea? I'm sure. Yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah, she said, do you know if Mozart or Beethoven have their, apparently they don't have any more copyrights because it's been so long.
Well, yeah, so that's so under UK law, and it's different in different territories, but they mostly match, at least in the EU. So it's 70 years after the death of the author. And so if there's no new arrangement of it, yeah, they go into public domain. I don't know when Mozart died, but I'm sure that was quite a long time ago. So if it was more than 70 years since he died, then they would most likely be public domain.
So by public domain, you mean anyone can play their music and claim copyright if they play their like a
And if you're playing it, exactly how the composition is, then you can't claim copyright in the composition because it's, you haven't come up with that. For it to be copyrightable, it has to be original. But if you created an original sound recording, there would be copyright in that specific version of the sound recording.
so like a cover song of it. So because you can't ask permission from Mozart to use the song, so you would just have to like will you be as a cover of that song, will you be the first person? Does it make sense? Like the first person to own your recording of a cover of a Mozart?
Of that recording. So that specific recording, there could be copyright in that. Granted, yeah, it's an original recording.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But the publishing is public domain, so you wouldn't get any like publishing rights on that side.
Is there a way to view what is on the public domain?
I think there are websites which I know some music supervisors use, but I don't know what they're called. But I'm sure that you could find them quite easily online, which is sorry to send you to Google.
Great, thank you.
No worries.
One last question before we leave. Thank you so much, Sophie. When do you think an artist should be looking at getting a lawyer? Yeah,
I mean, I think once you're kind of, it's hard. It's like if you feel like you're getting to the stage where you are wanting to exploit your music, it is a good idea to at least get in touch with a music lawyer. These days, we're seeing people approach us, and if there's someone that I've come across where I really like their music, I'd work with them from quite an early age, like early stage, before they've even got any management. Sometimes before people have even released their recordings fully, where they're just in the stage of kind of building traction for their next album. But then some people wait until they've released some music and figuring out, is there even any interest in it? It's probably worth saying that we don't, because of the way that the music industry works, we kind of would get in and act as advisors for the artists. But in the beginning, the way that it kind of works in terms of charging, we don't necessarily put like a price on that until you start getting deals. So we kind of put in investments, I guess, in the beginning in terms of our time, investing our time, answering ad hoc questions. And then as and when there's like an actual deal to help with, that's when, so we might have been in touch with the artist for, a year, 2 years before this happened. And then they bring you in, and that's when, if you're seeing in advance, then we might put a legal fees contribution and ask the publisher or the record label to pay that. But again, it would depend on the size of the deal and all of that stuff. But yeah, It's hard to say, but I would say sooner rather than later. Like basically consider a music lawyer to be part of your core team. So when you get when you're thinking of getting a manager, if you have starting to have questions, you know, what copyright should I give copyright to my producer? Those sort of questions we can always be a soundboard for. But equally, you know, you don't have to work with a music lawyer. You can navigate it yourself. There are some useful books out there. I guess the risk is just, it is a bit of a convoluted rights framework, as we talked about, both copyrights on the recording side and the composition side.
Yeah, and I think also having somebody that's looking after you, especially when you're reading a contract, because I don't know, I think artists are most of the time emotional. Or like, I always have to have third or fourth party reading the contracts just so I'm like, did I read it right? Is this correct? Like, you know, just yeah, no,
for sure. Having someone, I mean, that's part of building your team, having someone to soundboard off, and lawyers, definitely that's the capacity that we work in increasingly more now these days as well.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sofie, for all this amazing advice. I'm guessing if it's okay if people get in touch with you if they have any questions.
Yeah.
Cool. And yeah, thank you everybody for joining. And hopefully I'll see you at some point at another coffee morning, because that's how we met, right? Have an amazing night and